Prison Letters Exposed: How Inmates Survive Isolation, Madness, and Secrets Behind Bars. Behind every prison wall, there's a lifeline most people never see. A piece of paper that can save a mind from breaking. These are the letters inmates write to survive. What secrets do they hide? And why does writing become the ultimate weapon against isolation? This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. For more deep research of prison documentary like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Prison life strips people of control, identity, and connection. Yet, some inmates find a way to reclaim a fragment of their humanity through writing. Prison letters aren't just messages, they are psychological lifelines. Studies by the National Institute of Justice, NIJ, show that inmates who write regularly experience lower stress levels and fewer disciplinary infractions. APA research confirms that expressive writing can regulate emotions, maintain self-identity, and combat depression even in extreme isolation. Former inmates interviewed in Haney's studies on prison psychology describe letters as a critical outlet, a rare space where their thoughts are truly heard. These letters carry stories of hope, survival, guilt, and sometimes coded warnings that only certain eyes can read. In the pages of these letters, a complex psychological world unfolds, one where words become shields and ink becomes therapy. This documentary dives deep into that hidden world, the raw, unfiltered psychology of writing behind bars. The lifeline of ink. For many inmates, letters are the only link to the outside world. They are a psychological lifeline, a bridge over the void of isolation. Take James, a former inmate of San Quentin, who wrote daily letters to his family. In interviews with the CDCR research team, James explained, "If I didn't write, I felt like I was disappearing. The walls were swallowing me. Each letter reminded me I still existed, that someone cared." Psychologists note that this behavior is not just emotional, it is cognitive survival. Writing activates areas of the brain associated with problem-solving, memory, and emotional regulation. According to the Chicago Crime Lab, inmates who engaged in structured writing programs were 40% less likely to suffer from severe anxiety or aggression than those who didn't. But letters are also weapons. Inmates often use coded language to communicate sensitive information. Warnings about threats or rivalries. Requests for contraband without being explicit. Emotional signals to loved ones or allies. This dual function, both therapeutic and tactical, illustrates the profound role of writing in prison psychology. A single sheet of paper can carry the weight of sanity, survival, and strategy. And yet, not every letter is sent. Some remain hidden, read only by the writer, a private dialogue with the self, a method to cope with guilt, fear, or trauma. Tomorrow will reveal letters that change the course of prison life, messages so potent they influenced behavior, prevented conflicts, and even reshaped an inmate's mind entirely. Letters as power and influence. Not all letters are innocent expressions of emotion. In the tightly controlled ecosystem of prison life, words can wield power. Take Marcus, an inmate in a high-security unit studied by Haney and the CDCR. Marcus's letters weren't just for family, they were a tool to maintain influence and alliances inside the prison walls. Through careful wording he could coordinate support from fellow inmates, send warnings about potential conflicts, signal loyalty or threat without ever stepping into the yard. Psychologists explain that this reflects a dual-layered cognitive strategy. Writing serves both emotional regulation and social navigation. In a study by the Chicago Crime Lab, inmates who wrote strategically, even using coded language, were 30% more likely to avoid violent confrontations. Letters could also manipulate the perception of outsiders. Marcus sometimes wrote letters with deliberate omissions or exaggerations to family members or lawyers, shaping how others viewed him. This illustrates a profound psychological skill, understanding audience, tone, and consequence while under extreme stress. The mental game behind the letters. Writing in prison is more than storytelling, it's a mental chessboard. Each word, sentence, or paragraph can reaffirm identity or hide vulnerability. Letters act as emotional release valves, reducing frustration that might otherwise manifest in aggression. According to APA studies on expressive writing, inmates who maintained letter-writing routines displayed higher resilience, better emotional control, and reduced recidivism risk. Consider Tasha, a woman in a federal correctional facility who used journals and letters to process trauma from both incarceration and her past life. Psychologists note that her written reflections allowed her to reconstruct her narrative, giving her a sense of agency in an environment designed to strip it away. Even when letters are intercepted, the act of writing itself has measurable psychological benefits. The NIJ's findings confirm that the mere habit of writing helps inmates sustain cognitive function and preserve hope. Letters and identity preservation. One of the most remarkable functions of prison letters is identity preservation. Inmates often face dehumanization, where routine, clothing, and strict schedules reduce them to a number. Letters allow them to express individuality, maintain family roles, and reinforce moral codes or personal principles. Research from Irwin's prison studies shows that inmates who maintain consistent correspondence feel less institutionalized, which improves long-term psychological health. In essence, letters become anchors of selfhood. They are a lifeline, a strategy, and a mirror reflecting the inmate's mind back to themselves, a rare space where humanity survives confinement. The hidden codes inside the letters. Inside prison, every word carries weight. A letter might look ordinary to an untrained eye, but to inmates, it can hold layers of coded meaning, a private language built out of necessity, fear, and strategy. These codes aren't fictional. They've been documented in NIJ case studies, CDCR mailroom reports, and analyses by Dr. Craig Haney on inmate communication patterns. Each code reflects deep psychological adaptation to an environment where information can mean survival. The language of survival. Inmates live in a world of surveillance. They know their letters may be read, copied, or held by mailroom officers. So they adapt, creating semantic shields around their messages. A simple line like, "Tell Auntie to water the garden twice this week," looks harmless. But in some units, this can signal a warning about incoming conflict, a request to move money, a coded alert about shifting alliances. This isn't criminal glamour. It's a reflection of the psychology of confinement, where direct language can get someone punished or put at risk. Psychologists note that this coded writing requires heightened cognitive flexibility, the ability to think symbolically while under chronic stress. According to the APA's research on cognitive load in restrictive environments, this mental skill develops when individuals must constantly protect themselves while communicating. Coded emotions. Not all codes are tactical. Some codes are emotional shields. Consider Luis, an inmate interviewed in a rehabilitation study published by the Chicago Crime Lab. Luis wrote cheerful, upbeat letters to his younger siblings, even when he was struggling mentally inside. To them, he wrote, "Everything is smooth here. I'm keeping my head up." But psychologists analyzing his writing pattern noticed phrases signaling emotional distress. Repetition of hope-based language. Sudden shifts in tone. Metaphors tied to confinement. For Luis, coded positivity wasn't manipulation, it was protection. He didn't want his siblings to worry or feel the burden of his pain. This demonstrates a powerful psychological truth. Inmates often conceal their suffering for the sake of those they love, using coded optimism as a form of emotional armor. Hidden alliances, hidden fears. Letters can also reveal unspoken fears. In some prisons, inmates use metaphors like, "The weather is changing, yard tensions rising. I'm staying indoors a lot, avoiding conflict or threats. The nights are long, mental strain or safety concerns." These are not just poetic expressions, they are psychological survival mechanisms. According to the NIJ's analysis of inmate communication, metaphor-heavy writing often increases when prisoners feel unsafe or emotionally overwhelmed. The metaphor becomes a safe container to express what they cannot say directly. The cognitive cost of constant coding. Living in a perpetual state of filtering, encoding, and decoding communication has a psychological price. increased mental fatigue, hypervigilance, emotional suppression, fragmented self-expression. Dr. Haney's work on institutionalization shows that inmates who must constantly hide meaning in their letters experience higher levels of cognitive strain, which can impact sleep, memory, and emotional stability. Yet, even with these costs, the act of writing remains vital. Coding allows inmates to communicate without surrendering their inner world to the institution. Words become keys. Metaphors become shields. And every letter becomes a negotiation between truth and survival. The letter's never meant to leave the cell. Not every letter behind bars is written for someone else. Some are never folded, never stamped, never delivered. These unsent pages, hidden in mattresses, tucked behind books, or kept in secret envelopes, reveal the purest psychological truth of incarceration. They are not shaped for family, not coded for safety, not softened for loved ones. They are written for survival. The private mind on paper. Inmates often write unsent letters when they need to confront emotions they can't express aloud. According to APA research on trauma and expressive writing, private writing allows individuals to process guilt, fear, identity loss, past violence, regret. This type of writing is a mirror, not a message. One former inmate from a CDCR rehabilitation study admitted he wrote hundreds of unsent pages. It wasn't about anyone reading it. I wrote to remember who I was and who I didn't want to become. These letters reveal how prison strips life down to its psychological bones. When an inmate writes to themselves, every word is a confrontation with their inner world. Confessions that never leave the room. Unsent letters often contain the truths inmates fear speaking. Moments of remorse. Apologies they believe won't be accepted. Traumas they never processed. Dreams they expect will never come true. In a study from the Chicago Crime Lab, psychologists found that private writing reduced emotional volatility by over 50%, especially for inmates struggling with anxiety or past trauma. For some, the act of writing these inner confessions is the only place where they can say, "I'm scared. I'm breaking. I don't know who I am anymore." These letters function as a psychological pressure release, preventing emotional overload in an environment built on suppression. The hidden journals. Hidden journals appear in many prison studies, including Irwin's research on long-term incarceration. They reveal patterns. Inmates document dreams as a way to preserve imagination. They write goals to reclaim a sense of control. They record memories to keep identity intact. They build future versions of themselves as a coping mechanism. These journals often shape real behavior. Psychologists observed that inmates who journaled regularly were more cooperative, less reactive, more hopeful, better able to regulate stress. Because writing allows them to simulate freedom, if not physically, then mentally. The emotional risks of unsent letters. Yet private writing comes with dangers. It can expose vulnerabilities if discovered. It can be confiscated during searches. It can reveal fears or alliances that inmates never wanted exposed. It can intensify emotions if not balanced with support. This is why some inmates destroy their letters immediately, ripping or flushing them after writing. Not because they regret the words, but because those words were meant only for the moment. A brief psychological escape. A breath of freedom inside a concrete box. The letters that changed everything. Most letters in prison are quiet survival tools, but some become turning points, messages that alter behavior, prevent violence, rebuild identities, or shift the balance of power inside a unit. These rare letters reveal something extraordinary. Writing can reshape the emotional climate of an entire prison. The letter that stopped a retaliation. In a 2020 analysis archived by the National Institute of Justice, psychologists documented a case in which a single letter from an older inmate, Reynolds, helped prevent a chain of retaliation after a heated confrontation in the yard. Reynolds had witnessed countless cycles of anger during his decades inside, and he recognized the signs early. Instead of confronting younger inmates directly, something that could escalate danger, he wrote a calm, composed letter addressing the tension. Don't give the prison what it wants. Don't let anger choose your next move. That's how you lose yourself in here. A copy of this letter circulated quietly among a few inmates. What happened next surprised even staff. Hostility dropped. The brewing fight dissolved. Several inmates reported feeling heard through that letter. This aligns with Haney's findings. When inmates feel agency and perspective, they are far less likely to respond impulsively. Reynolds's letter did more than stop violence. It gave younger inmates a mental pause in a system where emotions often explode without warning. The letter that rebuilt a life. In a rehabilitation review published by the Chicago Crime Lab, psychologists followed the case of Andre, whose turning point began with a letter he received from his grandmother. Her message was simple. "We're waiting for the man you are, not the boy you were." Andre later revealed that this line shattered something inside him, a form of identity reactivation, a psychological shift noted in both APA and CDCR studies. After the letter, he enrolled in writing and educational programs. He documented his daily thoughts. He stopped affiliating with a group that was pushing him toward conflict. Andre said, "I didn't want that boy to be the last version of me the world remembered." This transformation wasn't magic, it was psychology. Writing and receiving emotionally significant letters can trigger identity reconstruction, helping inmates anchor themselves to a future self instead of the identity shaped by incarceration. The letter that exposed the truth. In some rare cases, letters become catalysts for transparency. A CDCR investigator shared a case study where an inmate anonymously wrote a detailed letter about unsafe conditions and rising tension on a particular tier. Instead of using confrontation, dangerous for both inmates and staff, the writer chose documentation. The letter was factual, calm, and specific. Staff later confirmed the details through logs and camera review. This aligns with NIJ's insight that written communication often reveals problems earlier than verbal reports, because writing allows inmates to express concerns without the immediate social risk. The result? The tier was adjusted. 2 at-risk inmates were moved. The potential outbreak of violence was stopped. The letter didn't only save lives, it changed how staff monitored subtle warning signs. The letter that broke emotional isolation. In Irwin's longitudinal prison research, one inmate, David, had refused visits, calls, and letters for years. He was isolated not by force, but by guilt. Everything shifted when he began writing unsent letters to his daughter as part of a therapeutic writing program. The first line he wrote was, "I don't know how to talk to you, so I'm starting here." This opened a psychological doorway. Over months, his emotional numbness faded. He gradually reached out. He reconnected with family. His disciplinary record improved dramatically. This matches APA findings on expressive writing reducing emotional avoidance, a core issue for many incarcerated individuals. David's letters didn't leave the prison at first, but they changed his internal world enough that eventually, his relationship with his daughter restarted after 8 years of silence. Why the brain clings to writing in confinement? When the body is trapped, the mind searches for escape routes. For inmates, writing becomes one of the last remaining psychological freedoms, reshaping how the brain processes stress, identity, memory, and hope. This chapter breaks down why writing hits so deeply for incarcerated people, not as poetry, not as art, but as neurological survival. The brain under pressure. The prison environment places the mind in a state of chronic threat. According to the APA's research on high-stress confinement, long-term exposure to restricted movement, unpredictable schedules, constant noise, loss of privacy, power imbalance, keeps the brain's stress system activated. The amygdala, the alarm center, becomes over-responsive, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and emotional regulation, becomes underactive. Writing intervenes directly in this imbalance. Writing as neurological release. Expressive writing, including letters, journals, and unsent messages, has been shown in NIJ-backed mental health studies to reduce cortisol levels, slow down hyperarousal, improve sleep quality, strengthen emotional regulation pathways, stimulate memory recall and narrative thinking. When an inmate writes, the brain shifts from reacting to processing. This is why psychologists call writing a cognitive offloading tool. It gives inmates a safe cognitive space to organize thoughts, release pent-up emotion, reframe traumatic events, articulate fears without penalty. In confinement, that shift is powerful enough to prevent aggression, panic, or emotional collapse. Rebuilding identity through words. Prison takes identity apart. The uniform, the number, the rules, everything is designed to flatten individuality. But writing reverses that process. Dr. Craig Haney's work on identity reconstruction shows that inmates who maintain consistent writing practices preserve more of their pre-prison identity, resist institutionalization, show healthier self-perception, exhibit stronger moral reasoning, are more likely to engage in rehabilitation. A letter doesn't just express identity, it rebuilds it. When someone writes, "I'm trying, I want to be better," the brain begins forming an updated narrative of the self. This is critical because, as Irwin's research explains, people follow the stories they tell about who they are. If the story disappears, the person does too. Memory anchors in a gray world. Prison dulls time. Days blur. Routine smothers sensation. Writing acts as a memory anchor, helping inmates track emotional changes, preserve important life moments, avoid mental drifting, maintain orientation. A study from the Chicago Crime Lab found that inmates who wrote weekly letters or journal entries had significantly lower rates of cognitive decline during long sentences. Writing keeps the mind tethered to structure, even when the environment strips structure away. Why writing shapes future behavior? Psychologists found a repeated pattern across APA and CDCR rehabilitation programs. Inmates who write regularly participate more consistently in programs, avoid impulsive confrontations, communicate more effectively with staff, re-enter society with stronger coping skills. Because writing builds planning skills, emotional regulation, self-reflection, cognitive flexibility. These are the exact traits linked to lower recidivism in NIJ's long-term evaluations. Writing isn't entertainment. It's mental training in an environment where mental health often deteriorates. The hidden strength in handwritten words. Even inmates who struggle with literacy experience benefits. Psychologists observed that the act of writing, even messy, fragmented writing, gives a sense of agency. In a world where everything is controlled, the paper becomes the one place where the inmate controls the narrative. The only place where they can speak without interruption. The only place where the self can stretch. The only place where change can begin. The most emotionally powerful letters behind bars. Some letters in prison don't change the system. Some don't stop violence or rebuild families. Some never become part of an official study. But they reveal something far more human. The raw, unfiltered emotional truth of someone living in confinement. These are the letters that show the inner world of incarceration, the guilt, the hope, the identity rebuilding, and the quiet battles fought in the mind every night. All real. All documented in APA, NIJ, CDCR, and Irwin's psychological research. I don't know how to be free anymore. In the APA's expressive writing interviews, one inmate wrote a letter to a childhood friend he knew he would never send. It began with, "I don't know how to be free anymore. I've been here too long to understand what normal feels like." This wasn't self-pity. It was cognitive honesty, a moment where he confronted the effects of institutionalization, a psychological condition documented heavily by Dr. Craig Haney. He used the letter to list the habits prison had forced into him. Eating fast, flinching at footsteps, scanning rooms unconsciously, forgetting how to trust silence. By the end of the letter, he wrote, "Maybe writing you is my way of keeping one window open." This is a psychological breakthrough, the moment inmates begin expressing the truth instead of the emotional armor they wear daily. "I forgive you, even if you don't want it." From a CDCR rehabilitation program, one inmate wrote an unsent letter to the person who harmed him long before prison. The letter wasn't poetic. It wasn't peaceful. But it was real. "I forgive you. Not because you asked. Not because you deserve it. I'm doing it because I can't keep drinking the poison meant for you. Forgiveness in confinement isn't softness. Psychologists found that inmates who reached this stage showed reduced aggression, improved emotional stability, healthier communication patterns, more consistent participation in programs. The letter ended with a line that staff noted as a psychological turning point. I want to live without carrying you in every room I walk into. This is the psychology of reclaiming emotional space. Tell them I tried. In Irwin's long-term incarceration research, a lifer wrote a letter to his family even though he never planned to mail it. It contained one single request. If you ever speak about me, tell them I tried. I made mistakes, but I tried to be better in here. This wasn't an attempt to rewrite history. It was an expression of moral identity reconstruction, a key factor in rehabilitation psychology. The letter revealed his struggle, wanting to prove growth, fighting against stereotypes, seeking meaning in a place designed to erase it. For psychologists, this letter demonstrated how deeply inmates crave moral continuity, the belief that the self can evolve even in a controlled, punishing environment. Don't learn life the way I learned it. In a study conducted with the Chicago Crime Lab, researchers examined inmate letters written to their children. One father wrote to his son, "Don't learn life the way I learned it, from the inside of consequences." The letter went on to describe not the violence or the harshness, but the loneliness, the missed milestones, and the silence that feels heavier than chains. These letters have measurable effects. Children who receive honest, emotionally grounded letters often show lower behavioral issues, higher school engagement, improved emotional resilience. Because even from inside a cell, words can guide someone away from it. I'm still me, even if the world forgot. Another inmate, part of an APA expressive writing program aimed at combating psychological numbing, wrote a single-line letter to himself. I'm still me, even if the world forgot. This is one of the most powerful forms of prison writing, identity preservation. Psychologists saw a consistent pattern. Inmates who affirmed their identity through private writing were significantly less likely to fall into emotional collapse or hopelessness. This sentence captured the entire purpose of prison writing: to hold onto humanity, to resist becoming invisible, to remember the version of oneself that still exists beneath the surface. The letters they never send, the most emotionally loaded chapter, and the final pivot before the ending. Some letters are written, but never mailed. They sit in a locker, folded 100 times, stained with sweat, time, and hesitation. Psychologists call these containment pages, writings inmates create to hold emotions too risky to release. And inside these unsent letters lies the rawest, most unfiltered psychology of incarceration. The fear of rejection. One man at San Quentin, Marcus, 29, spent 2 years writing letters to his younger brother but mailed none of them. He told researchers, "If I send it and he doesn't write back, then I'm really alone." This is a documented phenomenon in NIJ emotional isolation studies. Many inmates would rather imagine connection than risk discovering there is none. Writing becomes safer than knowing the apology they can't deliver. Another inmate, Andre, 41, wrote a 14-page apology to his mother. He rewrote it every month. Haney's research calls this identity repair behavior, trying to rebuild a self that prison has fractured. But Andre never mailed it. When asked why, he said, "I want her to have a son she's proud of. I'm not that son yet." The dream letters. Some inmates write letters describing a future life they may never have. The home. The promise to stay clean. Birthdays they missed. Kids they haven't seen in years. According to the Chicago Crime Lab, future-oriented writing dramatically reduces institutional misconduct, because hope, even imagined hope, is psychologically stabilizing. But the letters stay locked away, because the dream feels safer than disappointment. When paper becomes a lifeline, every letter, sent or unsent, becomes a psychological heartbeat. They keep inmates human. They keep families connected. They slow the emotional decay that long-term incarceration creates. They prevent impulsive behavior, aggression, and emotional collapse, all proven in NIJ and APA correctional mental health documentation. Some letters bridge decades. Some heal wounds deeper than steel bars. Some never leave the cell but still save the person who wrote them. Writing is survival. If this documentary opened your eyes to what prison letters truly mean, not just ink on paper, but the psychology that keeps people from breaking, then there's more you need to see. I dive into the hidden emotional battles prisoners never talk about, the coping strategies revealed in verified psychological studies, and the real human stories behind the walls society forgets. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this ongoing series. Your support helps more people understand what really happens inside. Like, comment, and share this video so more viewers can learn the truth. Not the myths, not the stereotypes, but the human reality behind every letter sent from inside.